It's the Locked On Flyers podcast for Monday, February 12th, your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that says, the Flyers got off to a great start coming back from the All-Star break with 3 wins.
They got the 3 wins. They still got some issues.
Your Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, and thanks for making Locked On Flyers your first listen every day. I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on the app formerly known as Twitter at @rmiriam. I'm here as always with Russ Cohen, who's on all your favorite social media apps at Sportsology. We are at Locked On Flyers on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Twitter as well. Today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. You can find us over on YouTube or on the SiriusXM app or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Subscribe to get our latest episode as soon as it's available here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We did get that third win in a row against the Seattle Kraken on Saturday night. It was an interesting setup to the Flyers lineup, and I think they tried some new things in that game, which we'll get into. But the upshot, Igor Zamula scratched. Risto was back in. Ali Lixell has not been returned to Lehigh Valley, but is sitting in the press box pretty consistently right now. What do you think of all that aspect of it, Russ?
Yeah, the aspect of Lixell sitting eludes me. It doesn't help the organization that A, he's sitting in Philly, and B, he's not in Lehigh. He needs to be playing somewhere. He should be playing in Philly because, he should be getting rewarded for having a good season, but he wasn't. So that's one thing. And the other thing is now it looks like Zamula, unless they're playing 11-7, isn't going to play. And so like the commitment to playing him now is going to be up to the organization if they trade a defenseman. Because if they don't trade a defenseman, I don't see a lot of playing time coming Zamula's way, except when they play the occasional 11-7.
Yeah, I think that is a more difficult part of it for me, more than anything. And I agree with you about Lixell. He should be playing if he wasn't going to play, and especially because they were playing at home. Maybe it's because the Phantoms were on the road in Bridgeport, that they didn't want him too far away. But I think that Lixell needs to just play. Whether it's with the Phantoms or with the Flyers is kind of debatable, I guess. But one thing is that Delorier, again, I don't know what he contributes that Lixell couldn't in the game. I think that's part of it. And then the other part is, what we've been talking about. You put Risto back in and you go with 6 defensemen. I like that there's 6 defensemen, but
me too.
But I think Zamula is the better option than Ristolainen right now. And once again, while they were the third pairing, which I think is a better slot for them, ultimately, Sealer Walker needs to get broken up just so we can figure this out.
Break him up, Rachel. You know that it's not going to happen.
Well, I know it, and I understand it's tough because they do play well together. But if you're going to end up trading Walker, or Sealer, you need to figure out a combination for the other guy that's going to work. And that's really the point we're trying to make here, because both of them are on the trading block at this point, or they're taking calls on them, right?
Right.
So I think as far as the lineup goes, those are kind of the questions that we're asking here. But, they did get that third win in a row. Seattle was a little shaky coming back because it was their first game back. We talked about that in the game preview. And I think that worked to the Flyers' advantage. I would say with all the trade rumors out there, Scott Laughton was on a mission to be and make a statement game for himself. And I think he accomplished that.
He did, but he probably boosted his trade value. So either way,
I know.
It was one of his more memorable games. He really was good. I don't love seeing him on the power play. It worked for that game. I don't know if that's a good permanent solution. What was really bugging me on the power play, there were a couple times when guys were slingshotting that it almost got picked off because they just were they were doing a good job of the zone entry. And then it was like, oh yeah, wait, I'm not allowed to do that. I got to slingshot it. And Seattle was catching on to that. And I didn't like that lack of execution. It was a pretty good game for the Flyers, and I say pretty good because I don't know what would have happened if Paling didn't get the shorthanded goal. Like that did change the game because things were starting to slip for him a little bit at that point, and that gave him the sort of the gusto to get over the finish line because
Right.
Seattle just didn't have a lot in the third either. They had a little bit, but not a lot. And if I give the Flyers credit for that, but I just without that shorthanded goal, I don't know how that game was going to go.
Yeah, it was very opportune for
Yeah.
sure. And again, Ryan Paling with the shorty goals. Love to see that from him as well. I want to go back to the power play conversation because I think it goes into a little bit about what the strategy for the Flyers was in this game overall that kind of spilled over into what they were doing with the power play. Because it felt like to me they were making overall in this game more set plays, right? Where they were
Hmm.
doing more concentrated zone entries. They were taking the puck outside and getting it net front and trying to get net front opportunities, which is exactly what we said to do. So it was the right thing. I think Seattle had the defensive structure to solve this strategy a little bit. But the Flyers got some really good options, and I really liked what they were trying. And I think that spilled over into the power play for them because they were running power play one through Owen Tippett first off. With he had 3 scoring chances for on the power play in this game, and then they were quote unquote doing auditions for the quarterback as far as Drysdale and York on power play one and power play two, in terms of trying to figure out what to do if Zamula's not there, right?
Yeah.
And I think that overall the power play looked better. They did only score 1 goal of 4 in this one. The power play they had in the second, 0 chances for. But in the 2 power play opportunities they had in the third period, they had a total of 5 scoring chances, 3 high danger chances for. And I think it took over the course of the game for them to get that structure and what they were doing with those units together. I think they need another game of that with a little bit of tweaking to really evaluate what's going on here.
Well, I mean, they've had a whole season to evaluate. I'll start there.
Sure.
Uh,
Sure.
Cam York should never be at the point on the power play because all he does is distribute. He doesn't really shoot. You might get one shot out of him in a power play chance. It's not enough, right? And then
Mhm.
honestly, Drysdale, he hasn't had a point in 5 games. He's only had 3 shots hit the net in
Yeah.
5 games. That's a problem
Right.
too.
Well, and that's what I thought was a deliberate change in the strategy here because they had been trying to take more shots from the point in the past, and that's where I thought like I don't know if this is the right adjustment, but they did make an adjustment here
They
in
did.
running it through Owen Tippett or running it through Scott Laughton as far as initiating the shots.
Well, the thing about
I think
Drysdale
that's
is
what was different.
yeah, no, and Couturier talked about like, how that one goal was really a set play, but really the set play was
Mhm.
to go to the net. Like we get that. But the
Yeah.
thing with Drysdale is if you're going to truly let him run a power play, then he has to have really control. He has to have full control of the puck. He's got to be able to bring it from one side to the other. They all have to rotate. They don't do any of that, Rachel. They don't.
No.
And that's where Drysdale's good. He's good when everything starts getting mixed up in the soup. But if you don't let that happen, you're not really getting the full value out of him.
Right, I agree with that, and that's why I think, like, I guess the upshot of what I'm saying is that they're trying something. I don't know if it's the right thing, but they were trying something that was a little more structured and a little different. I'm not sure it's the right thing, but I need to see a little more of it,
That's fair.
versus a different kind of team than Seattle, which, we've got another game tonight against a very different team in Arizona. Let's try it out again. But I do think ultimately that's where the Flyers should be headed to have Drysdale, especially be more motion oriented and carry the burden of that at the blue line because that is his bread and butter. With Cam York being a good option on power play too, or Zamula, to be honest.
I
We'll
mean,
see how that
Zamula is better
plays
than
out.
York on the power play. It's obvious
Yeah, at this point, at
at
this
this point.
point.
Yeah.
So, but I did think that spilled over into their 5-on-5 play in terms of the set plays. I do want to touch on Cal Petersen a little bit because, man, you know, our goalie choice picks are still laughably wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
But we got Seattle's goalie right, so
Yes.
we'll take that
We'll take
as
that
a
as a
win.
small victory.
But we really thought they wouldn't put Petersen in until tonight's game against Arizona, but they did against Seattle. And, I would say it was a pretty solid game on his part. I think that he made some key stops when he needed to, but he didn't see like a huge amount of action in the
No, they
game.
really were trying to limit the action. They also knew that Seattle had only been scoring 2.78 goals per game, so I guess they went with that. I still don't love one of the goals that went in over the far side shoulder. That he
Yeah,
came out far on that. Uh, I still don't have a lot of confidence in Cal Petersen. He may have gotten the win and gotten through that game, but they adjusted a lot
they did.
for Cal Petersen. I think we have to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and it was a block shot palooza in
Yes.
this game on both ends of the ice, to be fair.
And I got to
But
tell you, some guys, it's going to start battling. It's going to start piling up because, like, Forster took some point blank shots. Like, these guys can't keep taking point blank shots like this and have no residual effect. It's going to eventually.
yeah, I think so. But the Flyers do have another opportunity, like
They
I
do.
said, against the Arizona Coyotes tonight. And they are a very different team than they were when we saw them last. We're going to get into all of that coming up next. It is an important point in the season for the Flyers. The team is in the thick of the playoff hunt, but regardless of where we are in the standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports and especially daily fantasy hockey because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Fans can also play daily fantasy NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, and college football. So Sleeper is your place to go, and entries can be made in under a minute. All you have to do is pick whether NHL superstars like Connor McDavid, Sidney Crosby, or Austin Matthews, plus Flyers all-stars like Travis Konechny will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in any given game. To win that 100 times bet on Sleeper, you have to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Flyers fans. You can win 100 times your money by playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail those picks so you can win big. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's Locked On NHL in the code. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. On tomorrow's show, of course, we will recap the game against Arizona that we are talking about right now. Plus, it's Phantoms Tuesday. They got 2 shootout wins over this past weekend. So we'll dig into the whys and hows of that. Plus, we'll have a mailbag segment later this week. So get them in. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. Send us a message on Twitter or comment on our YouTube channel. Russ, most recently, when we talked about the Arizona Coyotes, it was in relation to the All-Star break and the arena situation. That drama is continuing
Oh,
and
yeah.
not in a good way. The Yotes, last time we saw them, December 7th, the Flyers won 4-1 in Arizona. They had a lot of injuries at that time, but Arizona was in 4th in the Central at that time, and they had a pretty solid winning record.
Mhm.
Now they've lost 5 in a row, and they're back at hockey 500.
It's what happens in the NHL. You know, these 5-game win streaks, 5-game losing streaks will kill you, and it definitely will sink you. They they don't have a good road record, so that's one thing that favors the Flyers here. Is their road record really stinks. It's one of the worst, and I do think that just has to do with, like, they're a decent team. They don't get they don't have a lot of playmakers on that team. They get scoring,
No.
but they don't have a lot of playmakers, and they're really lacking that. And so, I think that really does show up on the road because I think, you need to get some big plays on the road. And so, yeah, this is a game where again, we don't know which goalie. I mean, my guess would be Ingram because they really need the points, but that means they probably won't go with Ingram. They'll go with Vejmelka. But either way, they're going to face a pretty good goalie. It's definitely a winnable game in the sense that, yes, they're not a great road team, but now it's up to the Flyers to see if they don't kind of slack a little bit in this game.
Yeah, I think that there is a danger there. Although I will say, and I've said this before, this season has been very different for the Flyers in terms of playing to the level of the competition. They just don't do that this year.
Well, there's been moments they don't do it for long stretches. I'll say that.
No, that is true. That is true. I mean, they have like dips in their play, but it's not because of the level of the competition. I truly believe that this season, which the last couple of years, like I would say that sometimes they could play really well against a top team, but then play pretty lousy against one of the weaker teams. But that's just not the case this year. But I think, the thing with Arizona has lost any sense of confidence that they have, especially their most recent loss was an overtime loss to the Preds. Before that, they had lost to Vegas, the Canes, Tampa, and Florida, all top teams. So they've been playing tough teams pretty consistently in this stretch, and that's got to be really difficult for them. Whereas I feel like the Flyers have been able to step up and win a lot of tough games, and they nipped that losing streak in the bud after the All-Star break, like they really had to. But Arizona, when we saw them last, they were allowing less than 3 goals per game. Now it's above 3 goals per game. And their stats, they're just bottom third, like kind of team, as far as all their stats go.
Yeah, Clayton Keller is like the 40th ranked scorer in the league. And he's a really good player. But, now they're, depending more on guys like Dylan Guenther and Logan Cooley. And, that's always going to be spotty. I thought Cooley would have a better season. He still might have a better half season. I don't know what line they put him on, if they have a true fourth line or not. But, that whole thing is, they need to get more production out of young players, which is hard to do sometimes.
Yeah, and Logan Cooley was on the top line when we saw them last, but that was partially due to the injury situation that the team had at the time. So maybe he would have been a second or third liner, all things being equal. But now, like in the last game against the Preds, he was on the fourth line with Dylan Guenther and Barrett Hayton. So I think that there is some question mark there in terms of what to do with him. Jason Zucker has been playing pretty solidly, but he's on the third line. So he's getting a lot of assists there, which is kind of what he does. But I think that, there's just some question marks there in terms of who's going to step up and, take the lead with this team.
Well, here's the thing. And this is what I would be stressing. I mean, Dylan Guenther's got a tremendous shot and tremendous arsenal. So a game against Florida, he had 6 shots. He had 2 points. Then he had no shots. Then he had 1 shot, 2 shots. Like, they have to make it a point of getting him 5 shots a game. If you get Dylan Guenther 5 shots a game, he's going to start to get points. He's not going to get that on the fourth line.
I know.
I just don't get it. But
and that's why it's a weird fourth line for the Yotes, right? And it's not putting them in a good position to succeed at all.
No.
So I think that, there's just, I think, some discombobulation going on with Arizona. I think, it's hard to say whether the arena drama is in the background is causing any of it.
It doesn't help. I'm sure players talk about it in their spare time, because I think even though, look, chances are they're still going to be in Arizona next year, but there's a chance they won't be now. Like, things are pointing towards that more than ever. And so, like, if you're a family guy or whatever, it's gonna, you're gonna wonder where you're playing next year.
Yeah, I think so. I think, the other, I would say the one positive thing with the Yotes, and something they've done very well all season, is getting opportunities net front. So I think what the Flyers were doing in the game against Seattle in terms of trying to block a lot of shots and clear the puck out, I don't know how successful they were consistently, the Flyers were in that game, but I think they're gonna have to step that up a little bit against Arizona just to prevent those garbage goals and second opportunities in front of the net.
Yeah, when you got a guy like Lawson Krause, you know, he could shoot, but he also can do that in front of the net. Um, every once in a while, I have to admit though that Arizona gets an outlier, and did I bet that Michael Carson would have 15 goals? No,
No.
no. He's a 5'9" guy. I would not have guessed that. So every once in a while, they get a guy like this, and it's really interesting that they don't get a lot of notoriety while it's happening. So we'll see. I mean, maybe, that's a guy you got to watch out for because he's been he's one of their best goal scorers. Like he just
Yeah.
is. And it's weird. And it's just like I wouldn't have predicted that.
Yeah, the other thing is, I've heard very little trade rumors about Arizona, which normally every year it's just like everybody and anybody from Arizona is on the trading block for this team, and it just feels like there's very few people generating that kind of conversation this year because, like, there's been no individual or not a ton of individual standouts here, and Arizona is ostensibly trying to take that next step forward, but they haven't, so they're in this, like, no man's land on that front.
Well, I think the one thing we've learned is when teams are um, either going to change ownership or possibly change cities or whatever, there's usually kind of like a mandate that you shouldn't change things too much. And maybe that's what they're kind of going through. Like Ottawa didn't do too much while they were going under construction with their front office, right? I feel like
Yeah.
this is probably what's happening with them is that with the uncertainty, they're probably like, yeah, we can't change too much here because, then maybe the other group doesn't want to get them or you know get them in their building if they're strip mined or something. And so and it's not to say they would have a sell off, but I think they might be playing it safe here and they may not do much.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point as well. All right, so we will see how the Flyers fare against the Arizona Coyotes. It is Monday, so we will, of course, have our nemesis of the week, and we will do that coming up next.
Rack up all the buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams like the Sixers with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and more. And if you are going to bet the Sixers, I would go with the prop bets. I don't know what that team's going to do. They're going to struggle, I think, for some wins down the stretch without Embiid. Just visit fanduel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering all the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league like Locked On NHL. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe. Last week, we talked specifically about the Flyers getting back into gear after the All-Star break. They struggled before the break.
Mhm.
Like we've been talking about, I think they accomplished that, Russ,
They did,
getting
no
those
question.
3 wins in a row. So proud of you boys. I think that was a very good thing. And now, the stakes are getting even higher this week. We talked about it on Friday's show in terms of looking ahead to this week of action. Of course, we have Arizona tonight, but then later in the week, the Flyers are going into Toronto as their last game before the big outdoor game for the Stadium Series on Saturday. And a big stage for the Flyers for 2 games in a row this week. A lot of eyes are going to be on the Flyers, especially, I would say, because the Flyers are in a better position than the Devils going into
Right.
the Stadium Series game, which I don't think anybody would have predicted going into this
No.
season.
No, it's definitely a different kind of feel, and that is going to it's going to be different for both teams. Like I said, I think John Tortorella is going to have to answer a lot more questions than he normally likes to, just because with both places he's going to be under the spotlight a bit more. But yeah, I mean, this is a part of the season now that it's kind of a little bit of a weird spot with the outdoor game.
Yeah, so that's why it's my nemesis is, can the Flyers step it up on this big stage? And this game in Toronto, I think, just has a big giant microscope on it for everybody in the Flyers organization leading up to it. I think it's a 1-2 punch this
Well, they
week.
may get a fired up Toronto based on what happened with Ridley Gregg and that slap shot and that
Yes.
goal. So I think
Oof.
so I think that may have lit a fire under him. So that's something else that, the Flyers are gonna have to deal with. My nemesis this week is some of the unrealistic trade talk. Like, as an example, well, the Flyers will just retain on all 3 years or 4 years left on Risto's contract, and they'll trade him. And it's like, well, they've got a lot of money already retained with Kevin Hayes. How much money do you think this team wants to retain? Like, it's just, I think people have to be realistic about it. Like, I got a message about Ristolainen and someone's like, that sounds like a summer deal. I'm like, yeah, summer of 2026, because his contract runs out in 27. Nobody wants that kind of term or cash, even if you eat half of it. So I think there's a realistic nature here that has to. And look, I know people hear things, they're going to report them. It doesn't mean you have to report everything you hear. If I reported everything I heard, forget it. Just, I could only imagine the responses I would get. But I'm just saying, some of that has me a little frustrated, in the sense that some of it is just unrealistic. But, we're in silly season, so I guess that's the way it is.
Yeah, I think, you're looking at the more realistic trade options are Scott Laughton, are Walker,
Walker.
are and even Sealer to a
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
Just because Sealer's had such a great season that I think he's an interesting option
Yeah.
for a depth defenseman for a lot of contending teams. And I think, it's a sell high option for the
Mark
Flyers
Stahl's
there.
going to get traded, right? He's going to go for a conditional 5th round pick or something, and he'll get traded. That's a
Sure.
guarantee. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I think that, yeah, and I think trading Mark Stahl honestly would solve the glut of defenseman issue for the Flyers
It
for
would, but it
the
could go the
for the
other way.
remainder of
If
this
they hang
season.
in the playoff race, then Torts might want to hang on to Stahl, and then they could trade Zamula. Don't I've already, sent out a tweet that the Sabres were in Philly recently. There's a lot of talk between the Sabres and the Flyers. So
Yeah.
I can't say that
I
Zamula wouldn't get traded. I can't.
I know, and the name that has come up as a return or as part of a package or whatever is Casey Middlestat, which I think is bizarro world, but
Yeah, I don't see it
I just
happening,
don't know.
because they have to give him a contract after the season. Like, why would they do that?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think they would do that. So I don't think it'll be Middlestat. I brought up the name of Peyton Krebs, a guy who
Mm,
has really been misused there. Has got a lot of speed, plays center, and that would make more sense because he's, I think he's 22, going to be 23. Makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I think that name actually does make some degree of sense if you're going to get an existing player in return as opposed to, a draft pick
Right.
or a prospect that's like further down
And they're looking for
in the
players too.
system.
So I could see a 4-player deal coming out of this. Yeah, Krebs is 23 right now. So he
Mhm.
just turned it in January. So yeah, I mean, that's fine, because he's on a line with some guys that have 4 points for the year on the 4th line. Like, he's just not getting used right.
Yeah, I think
So
so. But
mm,
yeah, I think that is a an excellent point about people got to slow their roll in terms of retained salary. I think, yeah, given the length of Risto's contract, that it's just completely out of the realm of possibility, in my opinion, especially given the Kevin Hayes retention, which is, 2 more years in the books on that at, almost 3.6 million. That
it's a
is
lot of
nothing to
money.
sneeze at. That is a
No,
lot of money. There's 1 more year left of Tony DeAngelo money as well at like 1.7. So yeah, that is a lot. So I think that Flyers are going to have to be very, very smart about that. And I think, Risto can play the Mark Stahl role if they trade Mark Stahl.
right,
So that's
right.
how how I feel about that. At any rate, that will do it for today's show. We will be back tomorrow to talk about the Yotes game and the Phantoms. As a reminder, we always want to hear from you. So if you've got mailbag questions for for us, you can send them in via Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail or comment over on YouTube. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
Have a great day, everyone.